Ladies and gentlemen, in this RedGamerTech.com video, we're going to be discussing the PlayStation 4 controller and its practical uses in games. Quantic Dream have actually received some of the first PlayStation 4 developers kits, and the developers themselves are responsible for titles such as, say, Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls. Now, during a recent interview, one of the members of staff was talking in the Digital Dragons conference in Poland, which was just the weekend gone, and he was quoted in saying the following: "The most obvious things are the elements that, for example, PC games took advantage of, the extra gamer-friendly keyboards with LCD displays." Now, this is the important part, by the way. If I'm not mistaken, the touchpad, that would be of the PS4 controller, allows you to display things as well, so that's one of the things. Probably a lot of other people are going to be doing user interface elements on it. It's the thing that comes to mind first. I still don't know 100% of what things are going to be implemented in, and then it went on to say about their titles, and then finally he closed off by stating, "I don't think it's a breakthrough feature, not to disrespect it, but I still think it's very cool." Now, before we continue, I just want to hasten to add that this has not been confirmed, of course, by Sony in any stretch of the imagination. And from the previous data that we had, it seemed that the controller was, well, pretty much bereft of a screen. In other words, the only thing that this touchpad would do would be simply to act as a touchpad on, say, the Vita. In other words, you could touch it and various things would happen, but that's about it. However, if this latest rumor, or news, depending on how you want to perceive it, is true, and the final versions of the pad will indeed actually include the ability to actually display images as well, that would be, of course, very awesome. Now, I've mentioned before that, in my opinion, this could have a number of very awesome applications, just simply with the touchpad alone. Certain games just do not lend themselves too well for traditional joypad controls. It's just that simple. Titles such as RTSs are just notorious for that. Even user interfaces on, say, web browsers, if you're trying to point and click, it's just a pain. And obviously the other benefit of this, particularly because of the motion controls as well, and indeed one of the things that this person was even saying to begin with, was that they actually were designing the controller and they believe that the controller will be a lot better, a lot more comfortable for people who are not typically into gaming, but are very into, say, let's say iOS devices or Android and that type of thing. There are, of course, other inbuilt functionalities, such as, for example, if you're trying to aim down, say, sniper scopes on a first-person shooter, and just the ability to minutely adjust your aim, that would also work quite well. However, if it also has, say, a Wii U type of quality in that it would actually display a screen as well, it could also be quite useful. RTS games aren't the only things it could benefit. For example, if you're playing an MMO, for example, Diablo 3, imagine if you could just be able to simply click on certain hotbars. That would be pretty awesome. One thing that does worry me, however, if this is actually true and the display is and it is actually a display as well as a touchscreen, it's going to be fairly small. It's by no means something like, I don't know, say a galaxy in size. It's a pretty small little area that pretty much just fits in the middle of the pad. However, that isn't to say that it couldn't have certain uses. Items and that type of thing could easily be stored there, providing they're at a decent size which hopefully would be customizable. Even if not, as I've said earlier, it would be quite nice to be able to be used for, say, web browsing. Even things such as, say, zooming in and out of sniper scopes, which traditionally on a console you have a couple of ways to do. You can either, say, press the button a couple of times, which would go, say, 2 times zoom or 4 times zoom, or the other way would just be to press one of the triggers in, and obviously since they're analog, the harder you press the button, the more of a zoom that you get. This would also be quite, possible to do on the PS4 controller. However, one of the other options would be, of course, pinch to zoom and so forth, which, of course, you can easily do on, say, web browsing on the Android phones. We do know from previous announcements that one of the things that they also did for the PS4 controller is to remove a lot of the analog functionalities from, say, the square and the triangle and the other front-facing buttons. One of the reasons for this, quite simply put, is that it didn't really benefit most titles. It's very difficult, if you think about it, to, say, press square at a certain level of pressure. It's not really, very sensitive in that respect. You can kind of press it or not. Therefore, although some gamers obviously would have the ability to press it with a certain degree of pressure, if you're, say, practiced on the controller, if you're not really that well versed in it, or you're new to it, or, the average gamer, they probably won't be. And therefore, one of the things that Sony decided to do was to remove this functionality, which pretty much frees up bandwidth. Seems to always come down to bandwidth, doesn't it? Whether it's memory bandwidth or whether it's something more subtle that maybe you wouldn't really think of, such as simple Wi-Fi bandwidth. In reality, of course, it's all going to be there. And with the possible revelation, anyway, that this is indeed an actual screen, it would be I'll be very curious anyway to see just how the bandwidth is going to be managed in such an environment. However, rather obviously, we're not going to be seeing something like, a 1080p display running at 60 frames per second. One of the reasons for that, of course, would be putting more strain on the console CPU and other components anyway. It's even possible that we'll get more of a subtle functionality. For example, if you guys have ever played on, say, the Sega Dreamcast, which, of course, actually did have a display functionality with its VMS, and indeed it actually did other things as well, such as release a series of beeps if you got close to a certain item. Skies of Arcadia is a perfect example of that as well. And so everything from, say, maps to, being able to zoom in, as I've said previously, on, say, sniper-based weapons, RTS type of controls, inventory. All of that is definitely a possibility, combined with the added functionality of, say, tilt and zoom, the regular tilt and various other functionalities that the PlayStation's various controllers actually have built in. It's going to be that much more flexible for developers and gamers, and hopefully there's going to be a degree, as I've said earlier, of customization available for this as well. It would also be quite cool from a completely, subtle perspective is, imagine, for example, you were to get a message from, say, one of your friends online, and you didn't really want to pause the game to see it because, well, you didn't want to get massacred. It would be quite nice if you could simply press a button and that message appeared on your controller, so you could kind of flick your eyes down and just say, oh, look, Bob wants to play a game with me. Okay, then I'll, choose to join Bob's game of, Resistance or Killzone or whatever other title that you happen to be playing. Anyway, I think that just about does it for this particular video, so let me know your thoughts and opinions. Once again, I just want to reiterate that this is by no means confirmed by Sony, it's just simply what one developer stated. So it's entirely possible that he got his wires crossed or whatever. So anyway, bye for now and take care of yourselves.